So it's winter retreat, about 3 weeks in or so. And yeah. I guess I think it was 2 winter retreats ago, I asked Luangpo Pasano, you deal with sort of aversion by cultivating goodwill, and you deal with attraction, lust by contemplating the unattractive aspects of things. But how do you work with delusion? I seem to have a lot of that. He said, well, there's no technique that will work for delusion. And I didn't like that answer, but that's what the end I got. He went on to say that you developing its heedfulness, and that heedful, one brings up heedfulness because one recognizes that one's actions have consequences. One cares about the consequences, and so one pays attention, and one isn't deluded. So that's challenging. But delusion is in the list of greed, aversion, and delusion. Greed is said to be not so harmful, but difficult to get rid of. Aversion is said to be very harmful, but not too difficult to get rid of, because aversion feels crummy if you pay attention to it. But delusion is very harmful and very hard to eliminate. So, Luangpo's answer is no surprise in that sense. But yeah, I think the next year, Luangpo suggested that I read the chapter of Buddha Dhamma on Yoniso Manasikara. Surprised me a little bit, because I thought Luangpo would sort of turn me away from study, since I have an inclination that way, but that was his recommendation. And I remember taking notes, but I can't remember a whole lot about the chapter. But I was just reflecting that I think those concepts are connected. Yoniso Manasikara is the Pali words that get translated as wise attention, skillful attention, appropriate attention. The root yoni has one meaning of womb, and the attention that gets to the root of things, the heart of things. It's Yoniso Manasikara is, I believe the Buddha calls it the, just as the coming of dawn, signals that precedes the sunrise, so Yoniso Manasikara precedes all wholesome qualities, and it's also one of the 4 factors to develop for stream entry. And it's in terms of its relation to other qualities, I was thinking it's actually, in the way the forest tradition uses sati sampajanya or sati panya, it's actually, Yoniso Manasikara is not actually much different from the way those words are used in the forest tradition. Maybe slightly different in that Yoniso Manasikara is something you do, whereas Satipanya and Sati Sampajanya are often ascribed as qualities to people. These are things that you have mindfulness and clear comprehension. But you do Yoniso Manasikara. It's a moment by moment activity. Or, it's opposite, ayoniso manasikara, unskillful, inappropriate attention. And as with many of the Buddhas, the way it's defined is pragmatic, rather than this is exactly what it is. So, from the Sabbasava Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, when one attends inappropriately, unarisen asavas, effluence, taints, bad qualities arise, and arisen asavas increase and expand. Whereas when one attends appropriately, unarisen asavas do not arise, and arisen asavas are abandoned. So and later in the sutta, it clarifies that in this case, asavas can be connected with those three negative root qualities I mentioned first, connected with greed, connected with aversion, connected with delusion. So how we attend to things determines whether those qualities, whether wholesome qualities increase or diminish. One of this comes up all the time, and one of the applications of this is just with the investigating the hindrances, which is something I imagine that we're all doing, trying to meditate, and pretty soon you start investigating hindrances unless things are going very well. So, and it's useful to remember I would probably suggest memorizing the nutriments and the denutriments for the 5 hindrances. And so for the first hindrance, sensual desire, the nutriment for the nutriment that causes unarisen sensual desire to arise and arisen sensual desire to increase and expand is inappropriate attention to the sign of the beautiful. And because inappropriate attention is repeated every time for each nutriment, we often, when one recollects the list, one often forgets that. But, so beautiful sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and touches are out there. The problem is not the appealing things of the world. They're just, it's a combination of internal and external factors that make something appealing. provocative of desire. But those internal and external factors aren't intrinsically problematic. It's inappropriate attention to the sign of the beautiful. One sees something appealing and there's the sense, it would be really good if I got that. And there is where one's off base. And then the next one is ill will. And the nutriment for the arising of unarisen ill will and the increase and expansion of arisen ill will is inappropriate attention to the sign of the repulsive. There are lots of things out there that are not appealing. And they're just like that. But then our reaction of flinching, trying to, if something unattractive is coming our way, trying to figure out a way to get rid of it, to push it away, to scowl at it, whatever it is, it's not recognizing that this is just the other side. There's the attractive and there's the repulsive. And then the denourishment for sensual desire is actually appropriate attention to, Bhikkhu Bodhi translates it as the sign of foulness. That'd be asubha. And I don't actually know what the Pali for repulsive is. That's the nutriment for ill will. But it's appropriate, the denourishment for sensual desire that prevents arisen sensual desire from arising and arisen sensual desire from expanding is appropriate attention to the sign of the foul, which is almost the same as what causes ill will to arise, except the difference is how one attends to it. And then similarly, the denourishment for the hindrance of ill will is appropriate attention to the liberation of the mind through loving kindness, or through goodwill is probably a better translation. And again, it's appropriate attention to cultivating good feelings towards things, but one does it skillfully. And so it's an exercise to learn how the dynamics work for these first two hindrances. And the next hindrance is sloth and torpor, and its nutriment is inappropriate attention to discontent, to lethargy, lazy stretching, drowsiness after meals, and sluggishness of mind. And one monk memorized and studied in detail, and I don't have his knowledge of these terms, but it's five things. But again, inappropriate attention to all of them. So, if something's not working for us, one way to deal with it is to basically get sleepy. Quit, dull the attention. Don't pay attention, zone out. So that's inappropriate attention to discontent. Now one could, the discontent could be there, and if one attends appropriately, then you end up with something other than sloth and torpor. Also, just that one about lazy stretching, I suspect that refers to when you're getting out of bed. I remember, and I'm not great at this myself, but I remember one time when I was upataking Ajahn Amaro, and he was, I had his bowl, and he was supposed to be getting on a plane, and fairly soon, and I was taking his bowl over to his kuti, and he was napping. And because of the situation, I just stood there and waited with his bowl, because I needed to get it to him. And I remember just watching how quick, his alarm went off, and I watched how quickly he popped out of bed. It's like, whoa, okay, he's really trained at that. Napping however long he naps, and then pops right up, and I would have liked that bowl earlier, but he proceeded to pack his stuff very quick and get out to the car. So, again, contemplating the role of inappropriate attention there. The antidote to sloth and torpor is appropriate attention to the element of arousal, the element of endeavor, the element of exertion. So again, just contemplating the possibility of bringing up energy, what one can accomplish with that energy, and the application of that energy. And again, it's holding that appropriately, because you can hold every single one of those inappropriately. You can be overwhelmed by what you think you should. You can start thinking, well, I should do this, and I should do that, and I should do the other thing, and just get overwhelmed and not do any of it. And that's inappropriate attention. Then, for restlessness and remorse, the nutriment for that is inappropriate attention to unsettledness of mind, I believe. The mind can be unsettled, and sometimes it's like that. But then, if one pays attention to it in the wrong way, it gets worse. Whereas the denutriment for that is simply the opposite: appropriate attention to settledness of mind. So one way to apply this is even if the mind seems unsettled, well, you can find some part of the mind that's more settled than the rest, and pay appropriate attention to that. And then just be patient. And the mind and body will settle down. Or, let's see if that happens. And then finally, the final hindrance is doubt. And here the nutriment is inappropriate attention to things which are the basis for doubt. And one person, when this came up, one person said, that doesn't seem very clear to me. What are things that are a basis for doubt? But my own perspective is it doesn't take very it's not very hard to think of all sorts of things that are a basis for doubt. There's hundreds of them. And they're all there. But doubt will only arise if one pays attention to them inappropriately, demanding an answer to questions which don't have an answer right now. That story of the monk who while he was sitting in his meditation, the standard list of 10 questions the Buddha didn't answer came to his mind. Things like, is the universe infinite, finite, or infinite? Are the soul and body the same or two different things? What happens to enlighten to an awakened being after death? And he got worked up by this and thought, well, I'm gonna go. I know the Buddha hasn't answered these questions yet, but I'm gonna go tell the Buddha, hey, if you don't answer these questions, I'm going to leave the training. And so he goes and tells the Buddha that, basically. The Buddha said, when you took ordination, did you say, I will only ordain with you if you answer these 10 questions for me? No, Lord. And when I gave you ordination, did I say, I will ordain you and answer these 10 questions? No, Lord. So I think he uses, moga parisa, foolish man. Who are you to think that you get, what basis do you have for demanding this of me? And I forget if he says I forget if he repeats his teaching about, I teach suffering and the end of suffering at that point. But this is, it's a good story because it's what our minds can do. Demanding answers to questions which don't have them, and getting worked up about it. And if you just leave the questions there, then the mind doesn't get worked up. And then the antidote, the denourishment for the hindrance of doubt, is similarly illuminating. It's appropriate attention to skillful and unskillful states, blamable and blameless states, inferior and superior states, dark and bright states with their counterparts. And other than I must say I don't understand what with their counterparts means, but the other clauses are, it's paying, when you know what is skillful and what is unskillful, that's the knowledge that's important. And straight back to Yoniso Manasikara itself, the ability to determine what and how to pay attention to right now. So this is the there's certainly many other ways of working with all of those hindrances, but it's useful to keep the canonical perspective in mind here. The other bit, back to the Sabbasava Sutta, is that after introducing that concept after introducing Yoniso Manasikara as what determine the mental activity that determines whether these asavas increase or diminish, the Buddha then explains that there's a lot of ways to work with these. There's lots of asavas, and lots of appropriate ways of working with them. So it's a list, explains that there are asavas to be abandoned by seeing, those to be abandoned by restraining, those to be abandoned by using, those to be abandoned by avoiding, those to be abandoned by destroying, those to be abandoned, those to be abandoned by developing. And I think I missed one.
Enduring.
Yes, there we go. Those to be abandoned by enduring. So I think the first one, the asavas to be abandoned by seeing, is the longest section, and it's the most directly related to yoniso manasikara. In that what it is, the Buddha begins by describing the opposite. Basically a ordinary run-of-the-mill person does not discern what ideas, that's a translation of dhammas, which is not so easy to translate, but what ideas, what things are fit for attention and what things are unfit for attention. So he or she does not pay attention to things fit for attention, but instead pays attention to things that aren't. And the things that aren't are those which again cause asavas to arise and increase. But then the Buddha describes, well, how does one attend inappropriately? Well, let's see. And so it's a list of questions or ponderings. Was I in the past? Was I not in the past? What was I in the past? How was I in the past? Having been what? What was I in the past? Shall I be in the future? Shall I not be in the future? What shall I be in the future? How shall I be in the future? Having been what shall I be in the future? Or else one is inwardly perplexed about the immediate present. Am I? Am I not? What am I? How am I? Where did this being come from? Where is it bound? And then these are questions that all have to do with, all self-view. And in one way one can take them, I think, usefully both ways. One is as sort of abstract philosophical positions, where you're pondering whether was I in the past means, did I have previous lifetimes, or that sort of thing. Will I be in the future? It'll be, well, what happens after death? Am I now? Well, what's the nature of this sort of self thing now? But you can also take them as very practical. Just when you're meditating, day-to-day stuff comes up, and it's all this, what was I in the past? What did I really mean when I said that thing to that person? What did they think I said? And just on and on and on and on. It's very ordinary, but it's definitely, when one's meditating, it's definitely inappropriate attention. And similarly with the future. what's going to happen in the future? What's the best thing to do? And on and on and on. And it's again all revolving around this sense of self, and it all reinforces it. You think like that, and it's tiring, and one ends up being sort of more the center of the universe than one was when one began thinking about it. And that's not a good perspective, not helpful. It's a cause of suffering. And in the sutta, the Buddha explains that, while as a result of this pondering, views like self exists for me or self does not exist for me come up. And again, you create this, and in a more mundane level, you just attribute qualities to myself. What am I like? How am I? And I know for myself, one can just spend an entire, lots of time trying to figure out, sort of what qualities I have. Am I confused about this or am I not? Am I a careful person or am I a klutzy person? Am I empathetic or clueless as to other people's emotions? You can come up with, and you can just think through, you can just dredge up examples from the past on both sides and spend a lot of time trying to figure out what this person is. And it's obsessive, but it's unhelpful. So then the Buddha goes on to describe a well-instructed disciple of the Noble Ones. Discerns what ideas are fit for attention and what ideas are unfit for attention. And so he or she pays attention to the ideas fit for attention and not to those that are unfit for attention. And again, it's the ones, and in this way, unarisen asavas don't arise, and arisen asavas are abandoned. And here, the list of, and how does one attend appropriately? This is dukkha. This is suffering. This is the origin of dukkha. This is the cessation of dukkha. And this is the way leading to the cessation of dukkha. It's much simpler. And one can take those very same concepts in the mind, coming up. Am I an empathetic person, or am I basically I don't know what the opposite is, but not, can't perceive you don't resonate with other people at all. And then, but instead of actually going into the question, you recognize this is dukkha right here. And and again, it's very useful to feel that in the body. This is dukkha. And then you don't have to answer the question. Because if you simply wait on it, then one finds it, well, oftentimes the heart expands, the dukkha goes away, and it didn't need an answer. And that's, and there, and there, right there, you've learned something. And so, rather than going through the rest of the Sabbasava Sutta, I thought I might say a bit about the practice of goodwill. Back to appropriate attention for the abandoning of ill will. It's, when giving Dhamma talks, it's always helpful, one always tries to get a sense as to where, what would be helpful. It's more challenging with a community sometimes than with yourself, but yeah, just listening, a couple people have mentioned that, working with more negativity than they thought, and so, it's useful to recollect. It's useful to recollect, appropriate attention and antidotes to that. So that phrase, the liberation of the mind through goodwill, I don't know that it is actually well defined in the suttas. It's mentioned. It isn't mentioned as often as, say, the jhanas, and there's no list of factors. This is when you have this, and this other factor. Well, that's the liberation of mind through goodwill. One thing that occurs to me about that phrase is just there's basically whatever is going on, ill will always make it worse. That's guaranteed. And yet we can, it's not too hard to grasp on an intellectual level, but on a heart level, I don't get it much of the time. I'll add ill will to all kinds of things, and it inevitably makes them worse. But I haven't learned it yet. So but actually understanding that might be the understanding and living that might be the liberation of mind through loving kindness. It's not a permanently it's not a permanent liberation, but still it's a substantial understanding and well worth working towards. The traditional way of working with goodwill practice is to use phrases. People select them from different places. Myself, I use the ones from our chanting book, "May I abide in well-being," May I abide in freedom from hostility. May I abide in freedom from ill will. May I abide in freedom from anxiety. And may I maintain well-being in myself. Ajahn Zirpanyo mentioned he uses, may I be well, may I be kind, may I be wise, may I be free. But you find ones that work for you. And in his in Ajahn Pasano's book on the 2008 Metta retreat, Abundant, Exalted, Immeasurable, he says very emphatically that the goal of metta practice is not to try to find the perfect phrases. You won't. You can just try to craft these phrases. Oh, this is perfect, and then after a while, it doesn't work so well anymore. But you just work with phrases, and then actually cultivating those qualities of the heart. It takes one can it's useful in that one is, as the Karaniya Metta Sutta points out, one can use this practice in all postures. And this retreat, I'm finding it useful, particularly during walking meditation. So, but again, to be investigated. So, trying to think. I think that's probably enough. Just in, hope people can just maintain steady practice on the retreat. Investigate appropriate attention, and maintain goodwill for ourselves and others. So I leave this for your reflection.